Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Pete Tigers. My guest for this episode is based down in Devon. He's a writer, fishing guide, talented pianist, and an Exeter football fan too. You'll probably know him best as someone who helped spearhead the Coarse Fish on the Fly movement a number of years ago. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dominic Garnett. Dom, it's great to catch up with you and great to have you along. You've been name-checked in a number of these podcasts and I've had requests from listeners to have you along. So it's great to be able to catch up with you today.
Oh, thanks, Pete. It's really nice to be on. Thanks for having me. That's really nice. It's nice to hear I still have some degree of notoriety. So that's really nice to hear.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about all the things that you've done. And as I said, spearheading campaigns into coarse fishing and everything else that you've done. But let's start off with your fishing. All is good. It looks like you've been busy. You've been running a course I saw for Orvis with carp.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to have been approached by Orvis actually to run. Well, it started last season. It's not completely new, but I'm really nice to see them thinking about more different species, about a wider demographic as well, not just the kind of jet setters of this world who can afford to do bonefish, etc. That's all fantastic. But yeah, also, I think fly fishing really needs to concentrate on those, middle and low income earners, actually, whose local fishery might not be a sparkling chalk stream. It might be a commercial fishery. It might be a canal. So absolutely, I'm really pleased that Orvis are switching on to this, and they've been really good fun so far. We've done chub, we've done a day for canal species like rudd and roach. We've done a first carp day. So yeah.
And on the course that you just ran as well, were they experienced anglers who wanted to learn from somebody like yourself, or were they relatively new to fly fishing? The latest he had one attendee, but it's great for him. The others have been better attended, frankly. But we normally have up to sort of no more than 3-4 normally, because you want to give people decent one-to-one time. But no, it's generally been experienced fly anglers looking for a different string to the bow. So in this case, it was somebody from down the road in sort of Dorset way who wanted to fly fish on his local club lakes. He's got club lakes near him with carp in them. He hasn't got a huge amount of trout fishing, so it was perfect for him just to, the idea of him equipping him with the skills so he can comfortably go back home and think, oh, okay, I've got the afternoon off today, I'm going to go and catch some carp. And do you think that's where this growth in fishing will come from as well? Like you said, that it's more affordable for people as well, which is really, really important. But also people saying, right, I'm happy to step outside my comfort box and try something new. And for somebody like yourself, hosting these sorts of days, it must be thrilling because you've been doing this stuff for a very, very long time. And it must be quite pleasing seeing people say, yeah, actually, I get what he's on about.
So yeah, it's really pleasing. I think that was probably the direction of travel already. I'm not egotistical enough to think like I kind of invented it all. I like to think I gave it a pretty good push. The book exceeded my wildest expectations, frankly, because when I first tried publishers, they were like, not sure about that. Sounds a bit. They thought that nobody would be interested. Well, I thought a lot of people would be interested. I thought a lot of coarse anglers would probably be interested. I think I've always fancied that, but it looks a bit kind of out of my kind of league in a way, or out of my budget. And probably a lot of fly fishers probably fancied it as well. I thought, hang on a minute, I'm travelling miles to fish for trout. There's like a coarse fishery down the road. Why can't I fish there? So I think, I think it's moved on a lot in the last few years. Obviously, like your the real box office stuff seems to still be pike on the fly, carp also pretty big now. I think we're still waiting really for that wider stuff to become common currency, like brilliant species to catch, for example, chub, rudd, roach, other fish like that in hot weather. Really brilliant. Rudd and chub especially, like so free rising to flies. It really is not that difficult, and yet you still I still take the mickey out of the coarse fishing press for this. You get bits of instruction like wait till you see rudd feeding on a natural fly hatch and then catapult a load of maggots out. It's like, why get fly rod? Is that really such a crazy idea to feed them what they're eating? It's like
Yeah, and you write obviously for, is it Angling Times as well? So are they sort of
I do, yeah. I've
interested?
got my column.
Yeah, and is that interesting for them to see you talk about those sorts of things? And then, knowing you as I do, I guess you'd say, and I'd be exactly the same, that I'd be saying, yeah, well, why are they throwing maggots out when they could be? Are they sort of interested in that aspect of it as well? Because that's a key, isn't it?
That's been really pleasing because, oh gosh, it's been 12 years since the book came out, and at the time they were like different people there then, but they were a bit kind of cynical about it. They were like, "Oh, nice one for bringing out a book, Dom, but we think it's pointless." So some guy actually told me, "Oh, it's pointless," and I was like, "Well, no." I'm always willing to fight my corner, but I was like, "Well, no." Actually, quite a lot of the time, you think it's fussy because you haven't tried it. A lot of the time, the fly is the best method. If you're on a river in the summer and there's chub feeding in 18 inches, 2 feet of water, what's a better way to target them? A little weightless, fly with nothing on the line, or a blooming great, float with shot on that? It's no contest. But no, I'm pleased that it has been more widely accepted. It's now regularly in the news. I mean, I've tried to sneak a bit. My column is like right at the back page of the magazine. I'm kind of your curveball man, but I sneak as much as I can in. But it's now regularly in the news as well. Maybe when it started, they were like, "Oh, it's just one or two oddballs like that Dom bloke." But now there's quite a lot of people doing it, and there's people doing it, and really surprising me with what they're catching and where they're trying it. So that's brilliant. That's really satisfying for me to see. Yeah.
That's really cool to hear, and it was interesting what you were saying about those early days. Do you think part of that as well with the Angling Times, that it was to do with the perception of fly fishing as well? There was an element of that, yeah.
There's definitely some of that, and there is still some of that about. We haven't. Social media, it's as broad as it's long, really. Lots of positives and lots of negatives, but I think perhaps social media has actually. Perhaps it's made people like me, or dare I say it, a bit more visible. I think it's made it made it visible to a broader audience, and the fact that there's more. It's not just kind of the upper set going for trout and salmon. People are now able to share their catches, and I think it's spread a bit more like that. But we're still not quite there as far as I'm concerned in terms of making it the broad church it should be. But we're going in the right direction, I think, at the moment.
And do you think climate's helping with that?
How do you mean the climate?
Yeah, well, in the sense of the dry summer. Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, I guess I was thinking about the warm summers and and stuff like that.
No, absolutely. I've through the course of different jobs in angling, I've spoken to a lot of people like club guys, fishery owners. And it definitely the way of travel. I mean, like it or lump it, because I enjoy trout fishing as well, but a lot of those fisheries are just dying now. Whether its public taste is going to carp, or the stock is becoming expensive. People want catch and release. Trout are very brittle. Trout don't really take to high temperatures very well, whereas carp are very hardy. The difference between game and coarse fish is massive. I've looked at studies from America. They were looking at the effects of warm weather and time out of water with fish. And for example, I think they did some of the tests in summer, but on some of these tests, they took a salmon out of the water for 10 seconds. There were adverse effects on the fish. In other words, it affected its health, recovery, etc. With carp, they did a test on fish. They took those fish out of the water in some cases for over 10 minutes. No adverse effects whatsoever. I'm not recommending, by the way, that you spend 10 minutes out of the water with a carp. You should treat every fish you catch well, obviously, but it just shows you the kind of direction of travel there. Increasingly, we're getting it's plain as the nose on your face, isn't it? You're getting hot summers. You're getting more protracted periods of one type of weather. Cormorants, things like that, and also issues with this. Predation's increased. Obviously, it's really easy to remove smaller fish from fisheries, and things like wild brown trout unfortunately get hammered sometimes, and yet carp, once it reaches 2 or 3 pounds, there's nothing really going to eat it.
Yeah.
So
reasons X, Y, and Z, but that is the direction of travel. Carp. That's the other bit about this. It's an industry now. You know, when I was a kid, it was a bit like, oh, there are carp in that lake. Now they're everywhere, aren't they? And because of that, and because of the fact they're farmed, faster growing varieties, they're cheap to stock. If you look at the list of fish and the prices on their heads per kilo, carp is like, you know, yeah. Carp would be like your bottle of Plonk, wouldn't it? You know, stuff like Barbel would be like champagne to buy. The carp would be cheap as chips, wouldn't it? That'd be your like crate of French lagers or whatever you get for £8, wouldn't it? I mean, cheap. And that matters though, you know. Fisheries are struggling for cash. You know, we're already seeing some closures this year. But that I'm afraid, you know, people might be sort of spitting out their tea at this, but that is the direction of travel. That's the world we're now heading for.
And it is adaptation, isn't it? And how anglers adapt and how they change. And I think, you know, the work that you have laid down along with others has got anglers thinking about things slightly differently, and long may that continue as well. And that's a nice little segue along to talk about yourself a little bit more. And where did you start then with a fly rod?
So I was very much a coarse angler to start with. I started really young when I was about 3. I just loved it from the start. My dad used to take me on the River Thames, basically fishing a little whip. I mean, it was quite a while since until I really sampled coarse fishing. I'd have been probably about 21, something like that. So it's a long time ago now. It's about 25 years ago now-ish. Yeah, it was a Christmas present. My dad got me a fly rod. We'd always fancied trying it. We'd actually done some kind of ad hoc fly fishing on the river. What we used to do is sometimes get these whips. I'm hesitant to call it tenkara, but it was like a very crude form of tenkara. So we used to have these 4 and 5 metre whips, a little river called the Colne near us, which was full of chub at the time. My dad would buy a pot of daddy longlegs flies from the river. You get like some 4 or 5 pound leader, whip one of these on the end and basically flick it into the river. And it probably looked really crude now, but it worked. So that was probably my first experience of fly fishing, but fly fishing proper came a bit later. Only age of about 21, yeah. A Christmas present, fly rod. Kind of thought, brilliant, I've always fancied this, but I think I'd been a bit intimidated, frankly, by the books. I remember this one book on freshwater fishing I had, which had all kinds of stuff, and it was like, you read the fly fishing section, and it was just like, bloody hell, like duns, emergers, like upwings, and all this. You're like, bloody hell, I need to be some kind of David Bellamy to understand this. Whereas when you get to the rivers in Devon, it's often, you know, yeah, you can't use ridiculous tackle and catch, but actually most flies will work if they're suitable size. You know, they're not that picky. Actually, one thing the book didn't really, the biggest challenge was something the book didn't tell me about, and that's the fact that I'm 6'5", and it's bloody difficult not to scare these really quick-witted little fish. You know, they're not about to appear on University Challenge. You know, they're not brainy, but they've got really sharp senses. All that stuff about entomology and stuff, it's just sort of, I don't know. For me, I found it off-putting. And it's like when I coach people now, it's like, oh, God, do I need to know this? Do I need to know this? And I quite often tell them there are 3 main types of flies. There are 3 main types of flies. You've got your mayflies, you know, your upwings. You've got your little mothy-looking things, which are sedges. And you've got all the other stuff is mostly terrestrials. And that is, you don't need to know Latin names and stuff. My dad is a science teacher, so he could bore you all day long with that stuff. He could ruin a good walk with that sort of stuff. But you don't need to know all that stuff. It's just common sense, a lot of it, isn't it? You know, using stuff that's a sensible size, the right sort of colour. But I'm waffling now, but I think there is still sometimes a barrier there for fly fishing. Isn't it amazing that the simplest, most traditional method is the one that people think like, oh, my goodness, that's so complicated. Aren't you just making your life difficult for yourself? Really? Have you looked at I do match fishing and coarse fishing as well. And I beg to differ. If you look at most of those guys' garages, now there is a really, really complex way to fish. Far, far, far more complex than fly fishing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you make some really salient points there. And there's 2 things that spring to my mind. One of Girak's books, I think one of the fly shops says no Latin spoken here. So if people come in with the fancy names, I think they were largely ignored. But also there used to be in Crediton years and years when we moved here 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago, there was a pet shop and it sold some flies. and again, referencing Girac, as many of us do, but I walked into that store and it had some odd flies and it had pots of flies. And he always said, go for the ones that are the lowest. And they had black gnats. It was nearly empty. That
Yeah,
told me everything I needed to know about the
yeah,
rivers. And yeah, like you say, there is sometimes it can be made too confusing. Do you think sometimes it's made this way so that experts can survive as well?
yeah. That's kind of like a lot of people will might feel a bit rubbed up the wrong way by that, but I think it's true. So, do you know what? Sometimes I think fly fishing writers as well, and I am one, of course, but I think sometimes they make it look sort of cleverer than it is. You know, did that fly absolutely have to be presented? You know, a blue winged olive spinner to take? Probably not. I don't know. It's there is, and it's the same with the casting. Like when side cast and steeple cast and switch cast. A lot of the time, it's just really simple stuff, isn't it? Flicking up your back cast higher, or flicking it low, or putting it over your other shoulder because you've got a tree behind you, whatever. So a lot of the stuff, I guess it's sort of, it's almost like when you first read about it, you're like, bloody hell, this is technical. But actually, when you go and do it, a lot of it's quite instinctive, really, or it should be. It's quite obvious and instinctive, isn't it? It's a very natural way of fishing, for want of a better way of putting it, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I came up with the word tactical, which it's a combination of the two words, and so it's so complicated we're not going to understand it, basically. And like you say, the essence of fly fishing is, to me at least, well, I put a post out the other day and I just said, we just didn't take it too seriously. And as long as you enjoy it, you can get your fly from A to B and it's roughly in the right spot and it hasn't spooked the fish, you're probably in the game. I know there's a little bit more to it than that, but enjoy it for exactly what it is. That's the important thing, is it enjoyment.
Absolutely, yeah, really, really important. And it's really important that we're welcoming to people as well. And it looks like we're accessible, and because I still feel it doesn't always feel like that in fly fishing. I still, again, I'm not sure if I make myself popular for saying this, but I think sometimes we can be quite a selfish sport, sometimes quite an aloof sport. By which I mean sometimes it's like whole rivers are basically quite stitched up, and this is probably how I ended up going for coarse fish, because there's like so much river near me, but you can't get on any of it. There's no information, or it's owned by private landowners or about 15 retired guys who just want to. Basically, a lot of the time that they say they're into conservation and all this, but what they're really interested in is keeping it to themselves. They don't really want people like me there. That's the truth of it.
Yeah.
Look at the front of house with coarse fishing. Loads of open days. You can go and get the gear for free. You turn up to that, yeah, no problem. Give us a $5 or a $10 or whatever. You're fishing all it. We need to do better than this.
Yeah.
We do have that in fly fishing, but it's always like, oh, there's 2 fish ticket. And these days, that'll be £30, please.
Yeah, I wonder if these things will change a little bit. And like you say, the cost of fly fishing and the difficulties associated with running a fishery, a trout fishery, are incredibly difficult, and the costs of that may push people to look at things slightly differently. And I know I had the chance to rent some water down on the Dart years back that wasn't being used at that time. And I put a little group of youngsters together who'd never get a chance to fish it. And we fished it. We, cleaned it up a little bit. And it was really, really good fun. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. You still get flack because I was a guide at the time. So always using this to make money out of. And it was anything far from the truth. You can never win with these things. And that may be that aspect of the sport coming through sometimes a little bit. I wonder sometimes as well, it's because possibly we're a solitary pastime as well.
Yeah,
and
it's not a team sport. That's true. Yeah, very true.
Yeah, so those sorts of things. But as I said to you, we go down rabbit holes on here, and we've gone off. And I wanted to understand that fly rod came to you as a birthday present. Does that mean that Christmas present? Sorry. Does that mean that replaced your improvised tenkara setup on the river for coarse fish, or did that mean you said, right, well, I've got a fly rod, this means I'm going to go to the local trout fishery and give it a go?
We start in a local trout fishery, one that's not even there anymore. Some people who visited Devon or live around here might know watercress used to exist. That's where I caught the first trout, really. And yeah, it was, yeah, I'm not sure I'd say it was love at first cast, because it takes a bit of faffing about. My dad really gave me a first sort of casting lesson. My dad had a good primer. He was taught by a guy called Roddy Ray, who's sadly not around with us now, but he was great. I got his lessons sort of secondhand, but he had some great ways of sort of remembering bits of the cast. So I did manage to catch a couple of fish on my first ever session, and I think that was what got me right away. Just the feel of the rod when it bends. A fly rod is like nothing else, isn't it? It just bends more than any other rod, and you get more feel through it. And I think until you've actually tried fly fishing, you don't really get this. And it probably didn't take me very long to think like, wow, this is amazing. I wonder what a pike would feel like for a rod like that. Or I wonder what a big chub would feel like on tackle that bends like that. I just, yeah.
That's amazing. I'm getting a real insight into you and how you think as well. And immediately you're looking at these other aspects of fishing. Does that sum you up as a person, that you're always exploring, looking for niches, not necessarily niches, but other uses for away from the norm?
Yeah, definitely. I'm partly that. I like to think I'm quite a sort of the cliche is always an outside of the box. I'm like that with my music as well. I like doing things that are not obvious. You know, I don't like the X Factor. I much prefer jazz and blues, and or mixing up things that aren't normally mixed is fun to me. I don't like doing stuff where I think it's been done a million times. I sometimes find it a bit off-putting. There's a contradiction there as a fishing writer, because sometimes you see articles about things and they describe in great detail, go to this venue, use this tackle, use this strength line. And in some ways, you want some stepping stones, but in some ways I can think of nothing worse than turning up to a lake and already having the method dictated, already knowing the size of the fish. That's really dull to me. So yeah, but back to your question, it's partly that. There wasn't a hell of a lot of information to go on. I'd read bits of Richard Walker. I'd also read interesting stuff by people like Fred Buller on targeted coarse fish. There wasn't an awful lot, and that kind of made it exciting for me. The fact that it's not all mapped out. It's quite exciting. But it was also, they say necessity is the mother of invention as well, and it's very much that. When I look at the fishing around me, the Exe was a very private river, whereas the places that I knew, places like the River Colne, places like the canals near me, places like just general club coarse fisheries, I think it immediately seemed to me like, well, why can't I go and fly fish there? Quite often when I walk around in the summer, I see fish basking. Like, surely they'll take flies just because they haven't got any spots. It doesn't mean they're not eating flies.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. And does that mean then that your initial early routes, you've been catching, obviously, as you say, trout at the trout fishery, but did you feel costing for the reasons that you've given of getting on the river, but also that what you were catching previously on the Thames, that was sort of ingrained into your fishing psyche, that was something that you really were interested in? It was relived again through these experiences.
Perhaps. I think it's all like the culture of each of us for our fishing is different, isn't it? But I think there's also there's an inherent value judgment, isn't there? It's like a lot of us just think, certain species of fish are really valuable, precious to us, and others are not. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of that in fishing. There's still a lot of that attitude that if it's got an adipose fin, it's inherently worth more or more beautiful or more challenging. A lot of the time, it's not true, by the way. Coarse fish quite often live longer, they're wilier. Compare something like a really big chub to typical river trout. It's a much, much harder fish. That fish could be 20 years old. It could have been caught 4 or 5 times in its life. It's a lot. I'm digressing a bit, but yeah, there's a value judgment for all of that. So perhaps because I had that kind of nostalgic attachment as well to fish like rudd and perch and roach, etc., perhaps I never really saw them as lesser. I never really. It's like I got it in some of my early reviews. Like, it's funny, some bloke was saying like, carp, I imagine that's exciting because they pull back, but why would anyone want to fly fish for like roach or dace? And I was like, well, hang on a minute, you haven't tried it, have you? Why is that fish lesser than a trout? Why? Look at a fish like a rudd. I can't think of a better looking freshwater fish. I'd hate to choose between like a really beautiful big rudd and a specimen brown trout. I couldn't separate them. Look at the rudd. bright gold, sort of blood red fins, designed to eat flies. You know, look at the way the mouth was positioned. Look how freely it comes up in the water. That is just, in no way is that a second class fish. Okay, the entry ticket might be second class in terms of what you pay, but in no way whatsoever is that a second class fish for a fly angler.
Nice. I love your passion. I want to ask you a little bit about the fishing then, because you're starting to catch these coarse fish on fly. You're finding locations, you're catching some. I guess there wasn't much of a scene, and that dates me saying that. I think these days a scene, but I'm guessing there probably wasn't much of a scene. So did you
There
find
wasn't
it,
really, no.
yeah, to interact with people and to learn from people? And I know with Dave that you were early on, the two of you were kindred spirits.
I have to say, probably most of the anglers I rubbed shoulders with on the topic of fishing for coarse fish were unfortunately dead guys who wrote about it. But no, there were some people were doing it for carp, although most of them were doing kind of dog biscuits route, which is good fun, but it's not quite the same. And pike was not as big as it was now, but it was starting. So I used to run like a pike anglers club branch down in Devon way back, and so some of the anglers there were interested in it, partly because you had to fly fish to get on the reservoirs, but by and large, no. Quite often I was the only person with a fly rod on the venues I went to. I'd literally never run into anybody else with a fly rod, and I'd get comments like, "Oh, look, it's J.R. Hartley." Whatever. Yeah, very funny. Or like, "Oh, that's novel." But I'd never run into another fly angler. Whereas in the past few years, that's really changed. You know, I quite often up on the Somerset levels, and there's somebody fly fishing for pike. You know, or I'm on a coarse fishery like a river or a carp fishery, and there's somebody else catching carp off the top. So that has definitely changed in the last decade or so in a big way.
Awesome.
It's nice. It makes me feel more sane, Pete. It's not nice. Not always nice to be the only loony out there, is it? You want some company.
I don't know. Sometimes I listen to myself all the time, but
no,
talking to myself.
That is, you've got to be careful there, going down rabbit holes and niches, because it can be like, oh, I'm kind of special because I'm the only one doing this. I know one or two anglers like this. In fact, one particular angler was really, really rude when my book came out. I'm kind of 10 years ahead of where Dominic was, probably because he wishes he wrote the book. But it's sort of like, oh, I've pioneered this method that only I use, and I'm the world champion. No, it's not about that. My whole idea was like, I want to throw the sport open. I want to see what other people can do, and people have gone on to do absolutely wild things that I didn't think were possible. I've gone from, you know, perhaps starting a little bandwagon to jumping on other people's bandwagons who've taken it in completely different directions, which is fabulous. You know, one of my favourite phrases while writing the book and asking around is people like John Bailey, people like Bob James, people like Nigel Savage. You know, there were people doing branches of this, but the phrase I always took as inspiration then was it's amazing what you can achieve if you don't mind who gets the credit. You know, it's so I really cast the net wide. And like now, at the current point in time, there's some fascinating stuff going on. Catfish on the fly is one of them. If anyone wants to watch a really hair-raising footage of that, and me possibly needing a change of underwear while playing a fish of 45 pounds, it's on YouTube if you look at Dom Garnett fishing. But that's been amazing, because I never really. I thought maybe, if you go to Italy or somewhere where there are lots of catfish in the rivers and they're more predatory than ours, but I thought no way is anyone going to do that here. But they did. You know, people have been doing really well on it, and it's a graft. It took me 2 48-hour sessions basically to get a catfish, but boy, is it exciting when you get it. It's mental, isn't it, as well, when you think about it. I think I described it for the Angling Times as J.R. Hartley meets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Excellent. Do you have, so you've caught so many different species, this is taking me again another direction. Does that mean that you log the species? Are you somebody who looks at these things and think, right, okay, well, I've caught one of those, I've done that, or do you just go with the flow?
Funnily enough, I'm not really a tick box man like that. I mean, some of the boxes are unticked. I've never had an eel on the fly. It must be possible. I've had correspondence with people who are like, you never guess what happened the other day, which I love.
But no, I'm not really a tick box guy. Perhaps I was when I wrote the book, because some of the species I didn't have very local to me. I didn't have any barbel really in Devon. Didn't have things like Xander, so I had to travel quite far and wide. Yeah, so it's like a book makes it look like you're an overnight expert, but of course it was years in the making, and lots of travelling and quite a lot of failing as well. I think in today's social media world, isn't it? All we see is people's projected like, oh look, I've just done this, brilliant. That's another life experience ticked off. No, it's not like that when you write a book. A lot of it's lonely. A lot of it's like, another blank for tench or barbel, and like looking yourself in the mirror and probably thinking like, what the hell am I doing? How do I get to that point where but no, it worked. It worked in the end. A lot of it is confidence as well with these species, and perhaps it is difficult to be the first on a venue or whatever, because most people do like a bit of a roadmap, don't they? I suppose. Maybe my message is here is be brave. Like a lot of the time, the only reason it hasn't happened is because nobody's tried it. It's not because it's not possible. It's because it's not something that people do, and that can change.
Like your style. You've touched on the book, and that segues beautifully. Fly fishing for coarse fish. How did that happen? And did you feel that there was a need to, and as I'm sure myself and listeners are getting to learn, that you want to share stuff, like you say, rather than being the star of it, the expert, whatever that may be. And by writing it, of course, you will be deemed as being an expert on it. But I think you probably more wrote this to be able to share these experiences so that people can learn and try it themselves. But how did it come about? And was it an easy process for you?
So it wasn't a very easy process. I always think people who write and create stuff, we're naturally, often we're not very brilliant salesmen. We're people who don't like the answer no as well. People who write generally tend to be quite sensitive. We don't like being told like, I don't think that's a very good idea. I don't think that'll sell many books. So it took quite a long time. I think actually going back even before that, I think the first time I got rejected for an article, it probably took me 2 years to try again with another magazine. But with the actual book, I just thought it was fascinating. I'd been getting some really good results, and I just kind of thought, why isn't this a bigger thing? It'd make a great book. And perhaps dawned on me one day that actually no one's going to write it. Why don't you write it? There's so much I could say about that whole process, really. I mean, I was rejected the first few times I tried it. I think at least 2 other publishers rejected it. Merlin Unwin were a bit bold. It helped that they were like, we'd like to hear more. Let's meet you in person. And they could tell that I was passionate. They could tell that I could write as well. I was also at the time writing Fishing for Dummies, the UK edition of that. Very, very, very different book. But they could see, like, okay, this guy now it knows how to organise his writing and sell his writing as well as write a book. That's one thing a lot of angling authors miss. It's like writing the thing is only half the battle. It's how you persuade people that it's worth reading as well. So yeah, it was quite a long road. I was rejected a couple of times before I succeeded. But I think I just sold them the idea, saying, look, there's 2 ways that you can look at this. You can be a bit cynical, like the last people I tried it with, and think like, coarse anglers are not really going to be interested in this because it's fly fishing, and fly anglers are not going to be interested in this because it's coarse fishing. I thought, well, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe both parties will be interested in this. Maybe there probably are people who don't live near any decent trout fishing who'll think, like, hang on a minute, I don't need to catch trout. I could try this on chub or pike or whatever. Just as there are probably fly anglers who thought, well, actually, I've done a bit of coarse fishing as well. Why not? Why not? Be different. And there's still that whole thing about like trout and salmon being the fish, the royalty of fish, whereas coarse fish are kind of like stupid people's fish, to put it bluntly. But actually, a lot of the time, the opposite's true. Coarse fish are really challenging. They're more challenging than trout a lot of the time. So actually, it's not just let's chuck some fly rods in the hands of the plebs. It's also let's give you lot the biggest challenge you've ever had. Actually, maybe the pinnacle isn't catching trout on dry fly. Actually, maybe there's other stuff out there that's more challenging than that.
And so putting it together, did that mean that you had to, in effect, go fishing for those fish to be able to write it, or did it flow more easily? Because I'm thinking about photographs and everything else across the species.
I would say probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the fish I was already fishing for and had worked out how to be successful for, over a decade or so, really, before I ever took the book to Merlin Unwin. I've been catching things I never expect to catch, even things like tench. I've got some beautiful clear canals and drains near me. Up on the Somerset levels, out on the canals near me. We've got 3 really clear canals, the Exeter, the Tiverton Canal and the Bridgewater Taunton. They were really good proving ground because really clear water, lots of different species. You've got everything from, winter pike and perch through to everything, you name it, tench, bream, roach, rudd. So I've done most of it. The bits that were more challenging were finding out about things like how the hell do you catch zander on a fly. So I did quite a lot of travelling for that to big reservoirs, also to places like the Fens and the River Severn. The barbel were a big challenge as well. I was corresponding with people like John Bailey and Bob James who had done it. But again, it took quite a lot of trial and error. And again, that thing of like not trying to be like, oh, I'm kind of the be all and end all, I know all the answers. Because I didn't then, and I still don't. You need an inquisitive mind, I think. You need to drop your ego. You always need to keep that sucker in its place. Ask people who've done it. Ask people who've got kind of a foothold. By all means, then take it in a different direction. It's like music. You can't just sit down and play something spectacular. You have to start with some influences and people who have given you some sort of structure. Sure, take it in a different direction then, but not until you've got some sort of basic skills in place. Probably about 2/3 of the book. I'm digressing, but probably about 2/3 of the book, I kind of had some success with those species and developed some flies and tactics, whether borrowing from the existing sort of game fishing flies or sort of tweaking or making some of my own stuff up. But then probably about another third, I had to reach out to some people really in angling who'd done it. And probably people who were like me in a sense, but probably a bit later in their lives, but who'd also been willing to go off on a bit of a limb and say, look, yeah, okay, I'm going to spend this season seeing if I can catch a barbel out of the River Wyre.
Nice. I like that. And is it for you, some of those species that you didn't know so well when you're doing this for the book, let's take zander for an example, that you felt a pressure when you were fishing for them, yet an elation or relief when you did connect with them? Was that an interesting mix for you as well?
Yeah, both. In some ways, it was a bit of pressure off because I knew even if I didn't succeed, I knew people who had succeeded, basically, who could. But I wanted to do it. It's funny. I say that now, but actually, once I get an idea in my head, I can be quite a determined, some would say, bloody-minded person. I sort of keep going until you succeed at that. So, no, it was a relief, and there's a lot of trial and error involved, though. Like a good example of that would be the zander. I was going quite regularly to the River Severn, like quite a deep, rocky river, and it was just so horribly snaggy. I was fishing like the cheap bits, and it was just like tying up these beautiful flies, and you're spending an afternoon on the Severn, and you pretty much bloody lose all of them. So I had to develop ways of, either coming up with flies that were sinking lines and buoyant flies to get up off the bottom, or as often as not, actually, because zander don't fight quite as hard as pike, I was doing things like using Aberdeen sea hooks. So when you did hook the bottom, you could actually bend the hooks out without leaving loads of leaders and stuff on the bottom. So there's a lot of trial and error. As you hinted at, that there's pain as well as elation. I just kept going. Basically, I kind of got used to the silly comments on the bank and just kept going and found out as much as I could from the people who came before, basically, who had done it or had some idea of how you might do it.
Yeah, that's a really nice mix. And like you say, the mix from the highs and the lows must be equally opposite each other in how high and how low that they actually go as well. So Did you find, though, what was it like for you? And you said about, and often I've had many, many creatives and authors on here. What was that process like when the book was actually out there and live then? How did that feel for you? And was it a special moment?
Yeah, it was really special. I went to the British Fly Fair International. I went to the Big One show. Probably the best endorsement I had earlier. Well, two things that really strike me. I was like, phew, this might actually be a success. The first one was Cocky Bondu Books, who I'd highly recommend. The best bookshop in the country for fishing books, fully independent. Great guy, he runs it as well, Paul Morgan. But he put in an order for, I can't remember how much it was. It was several boxes of books. I actually think I went to his stand and probably hugged him, because it was like somebody's made a commitment. Like, I think this book is a winner. So that was brilliant. When he put that order in, and I heard about that, it was like brilliant. I went and signed some books on his stall as well, but that was like brilliant. What a vote of confidence. And the other one really was Matt Hayes. I went to the big one. A pal of Matt Hayes had walked around the show. You know, I hadn't gone stalking Matt Hayes with any books, but some pal of his had gone around the show, seen the book, and gone, I think my mate might be really interested. Can I just bring that back in a minute? And his mate turned up to be Matt Hayes. Came down and thinking like, oh, that's brilliant. At last, someone's written about it. It turned out Matt had done a bit of this as well. He'd done a bit of fly fishing for roach and chub and other stuff and pike. And he was like, oh, I think this is brilliant. So he gave me a bit of a shout as well, which helped. But those moments really stand out because in the early stages of a book, even though you've got the nod from a publisher, etc., you do think like, oh God, is anyone going to buy this? I obviously think it's worth writing, but do people think it's worth reading? Because like that's the classic divorce for many angling authors, isn't it? They confuse what they want to write with what people want to read, and quite often those are sadly different things. But in this case, it just seemed I was onto something good. It seemed to work quite quickly, and so again, the Angling Times were like, very well done. It looks really great. The book looks really good. But I also, like, one of my confidence at the it's someone I really trusted at the Angling Times was like, I think it's a really good book, Dom. He said, but look, don't be disappointed if it only sells a few copies. Fishing books are a hard sell, he was saying. He said, like, oh, if you sell 1,000 copies, you've done well. So I was a bit like, well, 12 years later, it's gone through 2 editions and may even be on a 3rd. I think it's done 5,000 or 6,000 copies, which is really good. And obviously, probably a lot more if you include all the people who've downloaded it, got it digitally now. But yeah, it wildly kind of outstripped my expectations.
Nicely done, and many congratulations. For listeners who haven't bought it, what's in there? What species? Give us a very short overview of that and the species that people can learn about in there.
So it's got pretty much all the main coarse species. So I could almost do it in order of difficulty. So you've got predators like pike and perch and zander, a bit more complicated. You've got the obvious targets like roach, rudd, dace, chub, all very catchable on the fly. But you've also got the oddballs in there. So you've got things like tench, carp, really fascinating one, barbel. And then you've also got a bit about kind of the other things you can catch in a bit less detail, but just kind of food for thought. So even stuff like catfish, but you've got other things like mini species, like everything from sort of bleak to gudgeon. And then you've got sections on the sort of fly life that is important. There's a lot of crossover with trout, but just looking at like the detective work, if you like, what that you do on the water, like what species are universal, what fly patterns are universal. And the last section, but you've got a little bit of step-by-step fly tying. I've deliberately picked stuff that's quite easy for people who may be very new to, I haven't gone for stuff that's ridiculous, that has, fake wings and stuff coming off it and the right number of legs. No, quite simple stuff. And a big glossary of a big collection of flies kind of by species. I just wanted to, I remember when I was starting out, there was always a bit of trepidation about like, oh, what am I going to choose? Is this going to work? So I wanted people to be able to say, to look in the book and think with confidence, like, okay, that fly definitely has a record of catching that fish. So there's all this stuff. There's other bits on watercraft, different presentations you can try, just general good advice. There's bits on tackle as well. I'm very deliberate about it. With each species, you've got like a kind of information box which tells you typical season for this fish, what kind of leaders and stuff will you need, what sort of strength lines, what are their habits. So yeah, I hope it's a lot more entertaining than a car repair manual, but it's also it is deliberately quite there's a lot of good how-to stuff in there.
Excellent. I can recommend it. I have a copy and it is really, really good. Crooked Lines is another book by yourself. It went in a completely different direction. Was that liberating to be able to do that? And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about it.
So Crooked Lines was like a collection of all the like the funniest and the weirdest stories. I've always had an eye for like quite a strange story. So things like travel expeditions to the frozen north of Europe and ice fishing, or conversations with this guy called Leon Guthrie, this Scottish fly type born with 6 fingers on each hand. All kinds of stuff like that. Adventures with some really odd characters. Going to lots of different parts, lots of urban fishing in there, lots of quite unlikely stuff, like just stuff you don't read about, like the day you went fishing with like an absolutely horrible hangover, things like this. Some of it was sort of pinched from some of the pages of the magazines I wrote for, but a lot of the time I was quite clipped. They didn't really like things like longer pieces or really, really short pieces or profanities or whatever in there. So it's kind of warts and all. It all went into the mix for Crooked Lines, and loads of really strange stuff as well. Like my adventures fishing in Manhattan. I was an intern there for a little while. So fishing in Central Park, where you've got like sirens and drug deals going on and all kinds of weird characters passing through in the background. And just out and out entertainment value, though. It's not a book that will teach you how to catch more fish at all, but it's a book that will entertain you.
So was that easier or harder to write than the previous one?
Oh, it's a book that needed less research because it was all in my head already, but actually with the craft of writing, it's probably more demanding than writing a how-to book, trying to write, without being pretentious about it, trying to write something that's literary and got some rhythm to it, a bit of kind of pop to it, really, like just entertaining, funny, just trying to write a bit differently as well. It's funny. I'm always been given fishing books by people like my older brother, and I'm always have to limit my diet a little bit and read them in small doses because I've always been really wary. Like I love Chris Yates, for example, but I do not want to write like Chris Yates. I want to write like myself. So what I don't want to do is binge on his stuff all the time. But I very much love it, and I will read it, but I have to go quite carefully with that.
That's a really good point for aspiring writers as well. And we had recently Paul Cañada on, who said, slightly tongue-in-cheek, not everyone can write like Girac. And Steve Duda I had on as well and said, you just got to have your own voice. And I think that's really, really salient points.
And you have to understand that some people might love it, but not everyone will love it. I mean, Girac's a really good example. He writes wonderfully, doesn't he? And talking right at the beginning about the podcast about everyone projecting this perfect life image at the moment. I love his warts and all sort of style. He's great, isn't he? He just lets it all hang out there.
And that's sort of liberating itself, isn't it, in the creative process to be able to do that because you're not feeling that you're constrained by anything.
Yeah, and the other thing, like back on social media these days, it's also aspirational, isn't it? Oh, look what I'm using, look where I'm fishing. And I kind of, part of me wanted to sort of wave 2 grubby fingers at all that and say, look where I'm fishing, down under the bloody motorway bridge, look what I'm using. A rod I've had for 10 years because I'm too cheap to buy another one. It's like I wanted to give it a dose of kind of warts and all. Like, part of me felt kind of quite, part of me felt like that just not enough of that existed, not just in fly fishing, in the whole of fishing.
just always this dull. Like no one ever fails, do they? In the magazines, none of the kit is ever bad, is it? Nobody ever blanks. Whenever you read about a match, it's the guy who won it. It's never about the bloke who fell in, is it? And actually, like success on one level, like it's like undistilled success, like it's like undistilled beauty. It's actually pretty boring, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is easy to, I'm sort of kind of with you. And I've found with the social media thing, and like you said, there are many wonderful things about it, but also I'm just sort of, I worry, and I've said this before, that people panic that they're not posting something. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It
no, it
doesn't
doesn't
matter
matter.
if a fish gets away. It doesn't matter. And I keep saying it on here that try not taking photos, try not posting anything,
Yeah,
and see if you still have a good time.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
found my posting is now, if I've got something to say, and it's not really about the fish, it's about the people I'm with, or if I'm on my own. I love the sky when I'm fishing, and particularly those moody skylines that we see. Those sorts of things are equally as interesting to me than a picture of a fish. That it is, and I don't know if you feel this, and people I've had on here as well, that we are evolving a little bit. It's going to be a slow move, but we're moving away from that sort of culture a little bit and paying more attention now, aren't we, to everything else that goes with it?
It's interesting, isn't it? You've got that parallel at the moment, like the whole growth of social media, and look at me, look at what I'm doing, look how brilliant I am, has grown. But at the same time, there's a real parallel movement with things like mindfulness, with mental health. Isn't it curious that the two things have? It's dare I say, it's almost like one is a reaction to the other, isn't it? We're speeding ahead so fast, and actually there is constantly this echo in the other ear of like, well, actually, maybe there's a lot more to life than all of that, and maybe we should be reaching for this like more reflective, slower existence, and learning to sort of be content within ourselves rather than pleasing other people all the time. I think that's so urgent, and I think it's so urgent in angling as well. You know, I despair slightly at how rapidly like a lot of our fishing media has disappeared. You know, it's why it's so good to see things like fly culture and Fallon's Angler succeeding, because we're going to lose that unless we've got custodians for that. But yeah, how will it all evolve? I sometimes think we'll look back at this bit of history and we'll look at it a bit like it's the Wild West. You know, the era when a convict runs for the leadership of America, the free world, and when everyone's I don't know what the answer is, by the way, but it's just I feel a bit cheated at the moment, just with the way the media is going. It's really difficult. Less and less of my income is coming from writing about fishing. It saddens me to say that because it's my absolute passion and the thing I've spent my life devoted to. But yeah, I mean, I've started a YouTube channel now, which is also good fun, but it's not the same as writing. And I just worry that social media is it's promoting this idea that like everything is, oh, you can be a winner, you know, oh, everyone can be a pro in angling or whatever. And actually what it does is it sells the dream to 100 times more people whilst pulling the rug away, essentially, while taking away all the money for the people who are actually writing books, writing magazines. So it's saying, oh, you can have the world, but it's actually taking the world away at the same time. It's actually quite cruel, but it needs people to get back to those core values and actually invest in things that are worth having. You know, longer form writing, books, you know, traditional media. Because if we're not careful, that all that will just be replaced with marketing. That's why carp fishing is winning 20-1 against fly fishing these days. Why is carp fishing winning? Why is angling just full of basically grifters selling stuff? Because it's got the most products to buy. It's got the most marketing budget. You know, that's why they're winning hand over fist. It's like I go to traditional coarse fishing venues now for a bit of float fishing. Everyone's there using 3 rods and big pit reels because they're winning. They've been sold the dream. Well, perhaps it's time we sold fly fishing better. Perhaps it's time we sold fly fishing better as an antidote to all this bullshit, basically. It's just salesmanship. It's just... But look, you can count the independent fishing journalists there are now on the fingers of one hand. Maybe on 2 fingers. It's just... It's all disappearing, and that is I'm sorry, that is not just a sign of the times. That is a choice. What do you want? Oh, brilliant! It's all free. I'm not going to pay for anything. Yeah, but it's all just fucking marketing in the end. It's just. There is a place for marketing, by the way.
Yeah.
Some of the work with tech companies, it's important. It's important. It was an industry there, but not at the price of stripping away everything. We absolutely desperately need good quality independent writing and people who represent those, those higher values of the sport. So it's not all just a con trick. Because that's the way it's going at the moment. It's just all bang, 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 fucking salesmen and grifters, basically. Carp fishing is full of it. You've got this fascinating species that there are dozens of ways to do it, with a fly rod, fascinating, for example. But you've been sold this absolute tunnel vision that you need to have thousands of pounds. Oh, you need a bivvy, you need 3 rods, you need alarms. It's like bullshit. Stop paying the salesmen and start paying content creators who are on your side. Sorry, I'll deep breath, Peter. I'm fed up with it, though. I'm fed up with it. Every season, I'm contacted by people who are like, I'm really keen to get into writing. Quite often, they send me sample work, and quite often, it's really, really good. And it breaks my heart to have to tell them, like, oh, sorry, mate, but that world's disappearing. Nobody wants to buy anything. Go and work for Nash or whatever.
Yeah, no, you make some really, really great points there, and I'm with you. We've done everything we can to try and support aspiring writers and support people who are trying to earn a living from that in some way, shape, or form. Also, what you said about this, the fish thing, and I noticed the other day, and again, a magazine I look up to in the US, Fly Fish Journal, I saw yesterday or day before that they're announcing a competition for small fish. And
that's great.
Small fish, which is great, which takes pressure off people. And perhaps it takes people like those and Jason and the work that he's doing over there to help take fishing there. Because I always believe what's happening over there in the US filters through here as well. Eventually, particularly in fly fishing,
they're ahead of us on what you on proper writing.
Yeah,
but it's much needed. And that's really great to hear. I was banging on the door of the Angling Times for years, even as an insider, saying like, why don't you rip up the rules of the Specimen Cup or the Drennan Cup? Why isn't there an award for like a mini species or the most species? Why isn't there an award for the most beautiful looking fish? It's always about what it weighs, isn't it? Even if the fish of the week, it doesn't seem to matter what it looks like. It can look like some punch drunk retired boxer, but it'll still win first prize. Is it all about that, really? It's all about just how far the dial spins, is it? Well, it ain't for me.
Yeah. And I think when people like yourself and myself as well, and many others are starting to say that, I think that's where change does start to come. And I think the important thing is, as we said at the very beginning, as long as people are enjoying it, and I've said on here before that people have given me a little bit of a kicking, that they've said, well, look, on the 2 or 3 days I go a year, I want to fill my boots. So I get that. I'm not getting to go out very often, but just to enjoy the whole thing for what it is and not take yourself or it too seriously. We do it because it's fun. That's why I
absolutely
do it. Because it's fun. I don't want to compete against somebody. I just want to have fun, spend some time with people I want to hang around with, talk. The other day Warren and I were fishing and we sat for bloody ages just waiting to see if we could see a sodding fish rise, which took forever. And then I think I stuffed it when it happened, but I can't remember now. But those sorts of things are, to me, the important bits. And that's what I take away. And I don't know if you've ever felt this, that I've been going through this spell a little bit recently. I think when you're so deeply entrenched in it, you can sometimes, your love for it can drift away just a little bit. It always comes back. And I was going through that. And I said to Warren, I'm struggling a little bit with it. I'm not enjoying it. And I'd said to Emma, in quite the same way, and then boom, I have a day like that, and it comes back strong, doesn't it?
That's really refreshingly honest of you, Peter. That's nice to hear. It's happened to me too. I always make absolutely sure at the moment. I'll tell you for one thing. I always make absolutely sure I take fairly regular trips in the season now where I don't take a posh camera with me.
I don't have a particular objective or a list of pictures I need or whatever, or anyone to meet. I just go and disappear and be myself, and that's really, really important. It can get really aspirational, can't it? And I don't feel like I've ever been like an uber sort of competitive angler or anything like that. But there have been times when I've probably been almost too immersed in the sport and can't see the wood for the trees. The way you describe it sounds almost like your relationship with your wife or whoever, doesn't it? It always comes back. There are moments when you get quite pissed off with them, but you always, sometimes you say, oh, what's happening? But then in the end, you always come around to that thing like, yeah, I love them. I love this. It always comes around if you're patient with yourself. But you've got to treat the things you love with passion. You've got to treat the things you're passionate about with quite a lot of care, though. The last thing you want is the thing you love to become a thing that brings you stress. But it can easily happen. It's happened to me, especially when I was kind of making my way, doing a lot of really badly paid and even unpaid work, and you just think, yeah. There's a lot of pressure, isn't there? Sometimes it's not always a fun thing being an angling hack. It's like you go and meet somebody, you go and do your own fishing. It's like, oh, unless if the pictures don't come out well, or if you don't catch what you were hoping to, or so and so you're interviewing turns out to be a bit of a miserable sod. It's like, oh, it's not just like, oh, I haven't had a great day's fishing. It's like, I'm not going to be paid. And no one at the other end of the magazine is going to say, oh, that's really hard, I'll pay your fuel money anyway. No, they're going to want all the pictures and everything. So, yeah, it's important. Yeah, reality check there. Like, treat your passions with a lot of care.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've spoken for over an hour. We've covered some... I promised you we'd go down rabbit holes, wormholes, and all that sort of stuff.
We've created a Warren pig there.
Yeah, I think it's all the better for that. And it's all the better for that. I want to move on to music very quickly. You are a very skillful pianist, but we have this Fly Culture playlist thing where I ask our guests to choose a song and I load it up on Spotify. Do you have a song that you can give me?
Oh, that's really tricky at the moment, because now you've built me up and said Dominic's a good pianist. You're probably going to be expecting some classical music or jazz and something. But actually, I think with the election coming up and the state of the country at the moment, I think might have been more likely to pick something like Sleaford Mods. I don't know if you've heard them.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just great. Really, really funny. They use quite choice language. Not everyone's cool with that, but just really funny, really cutting. They don't. I love it. It's almost like I'm never a fan of hip hop because it was all about all bling and about LA and all this. Well, this isn't. These guys are from Nottingham. It's just really fun. They're really funny. The track I'd probably pick is one of the new ones is called UK Grim, which is brilliant. There's also a really funny one they did with Orbital called You Dirty Rat. It's all about, pointing the finger at people who are talking about the right way to live and being judgmental and blaming this culture of blame. It's just kind of setting it straight and saying, you got the wrong target. Wake up.
Perfect. I will load that up a little bit later. For people who haven't got a copy of the book, if they want to connect with you, how do they find you? What are your handles, website, etc., etc.?
So my website, if you just Google DG, that's my initials, fishing, you'll get to that. Various other bits. If you just search for that, you'll generally find my YouTube channel is Dom Garnett Fishing. If you want to catch my music, it is The Missing Keys. That's on YouTube or Spotify or on Facebook. We just uploaded some. Been recording last week. Just enjoying the results at the moment. Playing this ridiculous, massive great grand piano in a big church hall in the middle of Plymouth, and it's really suited some of the music. We've gone really left field. We've done some covers, but done really left field versions. We've done things like Seven Nation Army and Eleanor Rigby, but rather than doing them as straight pop covers, which would be really boring, we've done them as big kind of thundering like gospel and blues numbers. So yeah, give them a listen as well.
I like the sound of that. Is that on Spotify?
It's not on Those are not on Spotify yet. They'll be up soon. There's some of our stuff's on Spotify, but the best place probably is YouTube for now for those.
Nice. Well, we've got those details. Dom, it's been great to chat with you. We haven't bumped into each other on the terraces at Exeter for a while, so that's probably overdue.
Yeah, I've got no
as
excuses really. I'm still an Exeter City Trust member. It's brilliant. You know, we've got a great fan-owned club in rude health at the moment, punching above the weight. I haven't been. Yeah, have you been recently?
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I was on the verge of getting a season ticket. I used to enjoy those trips so much, and I need to do something about that.
I love it.
soon.
Like, having a young family and stuff, and work, etc., just killed it a little bit my time. But I need to get back there. Well, next time you're going down, drop me a line because I should go back, and I think the same probably applies for you. It's good fun, isn't it?
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Yeah, proper grassroots football, and really, really good fun. Dom, it's been brilliant to catch up. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Not at all, Pete. No, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, it's been great to speak.
Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as me. There'll never be any charge for these. I just enjoy talking about life, fishing, and just about anything else along the line too. But of course, there'll be plenty more episodes coming very, very soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.